This is the Biblical Unitarian Podcast.
Hey YouTube, how's it going? Dustin Smith here with the Biblical Unitarian Podcast, the podcast that aims to start conversations about the oneness and unity of God and about the humanity of Jesus. And today we're going to be looking at the person of Jesus, namely the highly exalted and empowered human Jesus. Now, many readers of the New Testament have noticed that Jesus acts like God, speaks like God, and does things that only God can do. These readers have also acknowledged that the New Testament calls Jesus a human being, an actual man, dozens and dozens of times. Now, how can we account for both of these facts? Answer: Jesus is a highly exalted and empowered human being. Yes, there is your answer. Now, let's look at the evidence for this particular theology. We'll start in Matthew chapter 9, starting in verse 6, where Jesus is healing a paralytic. Jesus says, "But so that you may know that the Son of Man has authority on earth to forgive sins." Then he said to the paralytic, "Get up, pick up your bed, and go home." And he got up and went home. But when the crowds saw this, they were awestruck and glorified God, who had given such authority to men. Matthew chapter 9, verses 6 through 8. Jesus there tells us that he possesses authority on earth to forgive sins. Jesus calls himself a human being, the Son of Man, and even the crowds acknowledge the fact that God has given this authority to a human being, to Jesus. We can see later in the Gospel of Matthew, after the resurrection, that Jesus is exalted. In Matthew 28, verse 18, Jesus said, "All authority has been given to me in heaven and on earth." So there you can see earlier in Matthew, Jesus has authority on earth. And then after the resurrection, Jesus is exalted, and now he has authority in heaven and on earth. So that's Jesus being a highly exalted human being. Now, we don't only see this in the Synoptic Gospels. We could also identify this theology in the Gospel of John. Look at what Jesus says in John 5:27. Jesus says, "And he, God, gave him authority to execute judgment because he is the Son of Man." There, Jesus says that God gave him authority to do something that only God can do because Jesus is this special human being, the Son of Man. As a human being, Jesus possesses this authority from God. And we can see this later in the Gospel of John, chapter 10, verse 18, where Jesus says, "No one has taken it away from me, but I lay it down on my own initiative. I have authority to lay it down, and I have authority to take it up again. This commandment," here it is, "I received from the Father." There, Jesus admits that the Father gave to Jesus authority to lay down his life and to take it back up again. That is authority that Jesus, the human being, possessed, but he had it because God gave it to him. We can also see this in the high priestly prayer in John chapter 17, the first two verses, where Jesus spoke these things, lifting up his eyes to heaven. He said, "Father, the hour has come. Glorify your Son, that the Son may glorify you, even as you gave him authority over all flesh." There Jesus announces in a prayer to God, to the Father, that God gave to Jesus authority over all flesh. So that's a common thing that Jesus himself taught and admitted freely. We can also see it in the letters of Paul. Paul's theology is very clear that God exalted Jesus in a powerful way. We could see this in Philippians 2:9, where Paul says, "For this reason, God highly exalted him and bestowed on him the name which is above every name." There, Paul admits that God highly exalted Jesus after Jesus' death, and God shared with Jesus God's own name, the name that is above every name. That is, Jesus being a highly exalted human being, receiving his authority and this promotion and status from God himself. And lastly, we can see this in the book of Revelation, where Jesus speaks to these 7 churches. Jesus says in Revelation 2:27, I also received authority from my Father. So there Jesus admits that the Father gave the Father's authority to Jesus. So, based on the evidence that we have observed thus far, there are 3 facts upon which we can all agree. Fact number 1, Jesus repeatedly taught that he had been given authority directly from God. Fact number 2, God exalted and further authorized Jesus after his resurrection. We saw this in Matthew, we saw this in Paul, we saw this in the book of Revelation. Fact number 3, Jesus Christ bears this God-given authority while remaining a human being. Jesus is still a man, a member of the human race, as he bears this authority that God has given to him. So there you have it. Jesus is a highly exalted and highly empowered member of the human race. Be sure to like, subscribe, and share. If you'd like to get more videos from the Biblical Unitarian Podcast, check us out on iTunes for our audio podcast. My name is Dustin Smith. Until next time, you folks, take care.